Boom, we are alive, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today. Do you remember back in like May 2021, there was talk on 4chan of trying to liquidate a particular participant in the crypto sector? Well, I was reading through an article this morning by thechainsaw.com, Mr. Tom Mitchell, there over on the left-hand side of the screen. And they were talking about some of the deep dives that they had done into the wrapped AMC tokens on the FTX exchange. Now, this is a great question around if FTX was trading all of these synthetic tokens, did they actually own the underlying stock? Now, generally, if you buy a stock and your trading platform, the clearinghouse has to be able to locate that stock. I think at the end of every day. I'm not exactly sure. It's a pretty complex system. And we saw some of this breakdown around the location of stocks during the shorting of GameStop, where they were able to short GameStop to 140% more liquidity than GameStop technically had, which doesn't make, like, if you think about this doesn't make any sense, right? So I think now that we know FTX was being shady, fraudulent, and potentially even criminal, especially with some of the footsteps we've seen around the Together trial, we ask ourselves, were they doing anything credible, or were they just able to create the mirage of credibility through an enormous amount of money? And this actually happens quite often in society already. I see people give credit to those who have made money that clearly didn't make the money by doing anything that deserves credit. So the money acts as a social proof for many people. This is an interesting scientific dilemma. I'm sure some of you know of these experiments, but generally speaking, our mind has already created a bunch of automatic responses that make complex situations easier to navigate. We do this because we live in an exceedingly complex world, not just the survival one that we live on a day-to-day basis, but also, like the fire smoke coming through, also the complexity of an ever-increasing digital and technological world. So what this means is we will often rely on the data that's coming from other people that we trust. This is a great example. I do this often as well. I don't always do my own, like the deep dive of the research. Here, this is the chainsaw going through data of a specific contract that was used to look at the AMC wrap tokens. Now, the important part here is that they dug up approximately 525,000 wrapped AMC tokens, and that they had listed blatantly on the website claiming 400 million tokenized AMC shares were available for trading. So now that we've removed this idea of the cognitive bias of, oh, these lines are the same length, or we're looking at a trustworthy individual based off some of the social proof that we're seeing, which is often, how people make these assertions all the time in life. Doing good data research usually requires a multidisciplinary approach, and for many people it's very difficult. I know for me, like trying to judge statistics without someone trying to hold my hand, especially through very advanced stuff, like shot noise, when you're dealing with extraordinary aspects of data noise within where you're trying to find signal from. And we're good at this stuff. There's a lot of scientific research, but even science, as we know from some of our previous videos, goes off the fucking rails when there's a lot of money involved. Okay, so we've removed the cognitive bias that not only could they have been doing things that were just shady, fraudulent, but then entirely criminal, because we know psychopaths exist. How deep does that rabbit hole go? So here, again, what we're doing is we're relying on the blockchain to give us the data, and someone here who's done the time to do the research on the AMC tokens, which I would have never thought to do. So here it says, again, the question is, did FTX own any of the assets, and how many of the assets did they own that they were shorting through these abstract digital mechanisms? We know that you can take out flash loans and buy and flop and swip. There's a whole bunch of crazy stuff you can do with this new digital money verse. But the weird thing is that around 5 days ago, or longer than that, around 8 days ago, on November 27th, they deleted all of this evidence from their website. Okay, so the tweet on the screen right now by Krista ball. The FTX AMC token white paper is gone. All the evidence has been removed. So we've concluded, after making the mistake originally through social proof, I guess this is how due diligence breaks down. This is how science breaks down as well. You end up with an overwhelming consensus that's clearly wrong. So nonetheless, like, there's correlations here to other fields of our study that bring us, I think, a pretty clear example of why and how this happens on an area that's maybe less political as well. Strictly financial though, crimes all the same. So what's interesting here, I think, is the relationship between the two markets as well, because this is where serious implications start to take place. We don't know what a totally illiquid supply of something will do other than go up if there's demand over a long enough period of time, and smart enough investors that know how to play the game. So here, if FTX was lying about how many synthetic tokens they have around AMC and potentially able to manipulate the price on the ticker of the NASDAQ as well, we know that stuff like this already exists in the gold and silver models. They do this with paper derivatives based off futures. And you could come up with a less contentious reason for why they do it and say it's not criminal, but because we're already, allegedly, I'm not saying these people are criminal. What do I know about the law? But it looks pretty criminal to me. So if they're able to manipulate these prices of the open market's value around AMC, things like GameStop, and you know there's already the discrepancy to potentially sell short way more than a company has to exist. You're looking at a monopolization through the banking system, right? It means that through banking you can essentially make or break companies. And this is one of the initial early activist arguments around GameStop, was that, here are all these hedge funds trying to put, like, what a lot of people consider to be a mom and pop mortar business that's just trying to make it through the pandemic. Here, if we assume that they were criminals maybe working in tandem, or at least in the affect of never letting a good crisis go to waste, you see a type of collusion between the regulators and the perpetrators, right? That's what we're witnessing now. And Maxine Waters messages Sam, or Sam posts a message, and he's like, no, I don't know if I can make it. I don't know if I'm totally done figuring this out yet. And she was, I guess I should have her tweet up here as well, but nonetheless, the fact that you find perpetrator and regulator openly conversing on a public forum such as Twitter about not showing up or showing up to this hearing around regulation, what often ends up happening is the regulation that would be in the favor of the individual is lost, and the favor of the perpetrator and the regulator is gained. And this is to our detriment quite often, especially because if we understand that the reason why the mistake is being incurred, whether it's intentional or not, this is, I think, where criminality in what's called a jurisprudence or something like this, there's probably another word for this, really comes into play, is, are they intentionally doing, this would be the difference between like manslaughter and first or second or third degree murder, I believe, which is something like this, where did you intentionally do it, or did it happen by accident, or was it self-defense? They're variations of what people in the court systems have based as the kind of like the intentionality of an act, and then therefore your degree of culpability for doing the thing, right? So Sam's kind of argument here basically has been, I don't know what I'm doing. I never really knew what I was doing. We're gonna have to ask all these other people, well, where are they? Well, they haven't been speaking publicly. Caroline shows up in New York City, looks like she's buying coffee. I think what we're witnessing, again, if we understand that it's been criminal, not to completely adjudicate the malevolence of the regulators, right? Because what we will end up with is a much harsher ecosystem. So the last piece of evidence here comes from FTX term of service versus what they advertise. They advertise that you could redeem at any point the AMC stocks, but the terms of service seems to say otherwise. So what's difficult here is if you're dealing with a company that we've now crossed into the allegedly criminal path towards, and they were able to manipulate the price of assets in the open market, what makes us think that we weren't seeing some sort of price manipulation in the asset itself? Now, as someone who talks about Wyckoff and the idea that the accumulation and distribution events themselves are a form of manipulation by bigger players, here we're looking at a form of manipulation through derivatives. So the fact that the AMC and the potentiality for GameStop or other Tesla manipulations, by the idea that the brokers could just be like, yeah, we actually have those stocks, even though they didn't, that brings into a much larger financial question about what happens next. And ultimately, you know, my yesterday's video was about, could Bitcoin go to $5,000? And I think the importance of that question is always to understand that there's downside risk to everything, or at least the visual appearance of it. I mean, oil went to negative $120 in the beginning of the pandemic. Like, I didn't know that was possible. So I want people to be aware that when things start to go weird, you should not focus on the price that's on the screen too much, and try to better assert the value of the thing that it is you're invested in. What Bitcoin, crypto has brought to the entire market, I think we're still figuring out. We're still in the early days of understanding what it potentially means if we see a real decentralization of power and money and governance or identity, and hopefully medicine, science over time, because a lot of those areas have been extraordinarily corrupted at their connection points and corroded, which is what the point of the technology is effectively trying to debase or remove from the system. So the fact that we went from this kind of social understanding with FTX to a complete breakdown into alleged criminality, I think we need to look at this as a much bigger entity in the background. And that was something I was slow to make, but as soon as I saw its fingerprints, you have to call it out effectively. The Together trial is a great example of something where that actually went potentially against both of my favorite Satoshis. Bitcoin itself, and abstract derivative markets on it that could move the price, whether up or down. And again, there's arguments for futures and derivatives. We won't go too down the weeds there as well, but also Satoshi Omura. So next time, the clear social boundaries of investments we make, but also understanding after the effect how significant that is for the broader contextual markets, because it means there may have been manipulation, and we already know that from the traditional space. So that's a pretty big deal. But we need to be aware of now is the regulators and the perpetrators getting closer to in bed together, because that's what it looks like they're doing when they're tweeting. Anyway, just a quick little thought process. I thought that was a great article by Tom Mitchell Hill. I think I called him Mitchell Hill. Mitchell Hill. Great little deep dive there, but I was more interested in the philosophical aspects, because it means it might not have just been AMC token that they were around with. It could have been all of them. So yeah, very bullish at the end of the day over the long period of time. Today, tomorrow, I can't tell. That's not really too important to me at this point. But over the next 5 to 10 years, wow, the incredible thesis pinpoint is we need better decentralization of things. That's it. We'll see you on the next one.